Something quiet is happening in the Western Pacific right now, and it is far more consequential than anything you are reading about in the mainstream news cycle. Japan, the country the world has associated with pacifism for 8 decades, the country that wrote a constitutional clause literally forbidding it from waging war, is building what analysts are now openly calling a missile archipelago, a chain of bases, radar towers, launch systems, and strike weapons stretching all the way from the southern tip of Kyushu down through 160 islands to within 70 miles of Taiwan. And the Chinese military, which spent 2 decades betting that Japan would never cross this line, is scrambling to figure out what to do about it. This is not a hypothetical future development. In the early hours of a quiet morning in March 2026, a tightly guarded military convoy moved through Kumamoto Prefecture in southern Japan, carrying launch units of the upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile to Camp Kengun, deployed under strict secrecy, symbolizing a turning point in Japan's post-war security policy. For the first time since 1945, Japan is fielding strike capabilities that can reach targets far beyond its own coastline, and Beijing is watching every single move. Now let's think about what is really going on here, because the surface-level narrative, Japan is just responding to China's aggression, only tells you part of the story. There is something deeper, more structural, and frankly more alarming happening beneath the headlines. And to understand it, you have to look at the full picture of what Japan is actually building, why it is building it now, and what this means for every power structure in the Indo-Pacific, including the United States. Up and down the 160-strong Ryukyu Island chain, Japan is quickly putting in place missile batteries, radar towers, ammunition storage sites, and other combat facilities, while also beginning to deploy major military assets on Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's 4 main islands, including F-35 fighter jets and long-range missiles. Now, when you hear a sentence like that, your mind might jump to the comparison with NATO or some European buildup. But stop, think about the geography. These islands do not point towards some distant adversary across an ocean. They point directly at China's coastline, at Taiwan, at the precise choke points through which Chinese naval forces must pass if they ever want to operate in the open Pacific. Japan is not building a fence, Japan is building a kill zone, and the numbers behind this buildup are staggering. The total Japanese defense budget from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2027 will reach 43 trillion yen, with defense spending set to meet NATO's standard of 2% of GDP by fiscal year 2027. This is a country that, for the better part of 8 decades, held itself deliberately to 1% of GDP on defense as a moral and constitutional statement to the world. That line has now been abandoned. Japan's record $58 billion defense budget for the coming year includes approximately $1.14 billion for upgraded surface-to-ship missiles like the Type 12s already deployed on Ishigaki Island, less than 200 miles from Taiwan. And that is just one line item in a budget that is growing every single year. Here is what makes this particular moment so historically unusual. Japan is not just spending money, it is making doctrinal decisions, strategic choices that are irreversible. Japan has ordered 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles with a range of about 1,600 kilometers to be deployed on Aegis-equipped destroyers, giving the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force its first-ever long-range land attack capability. Think about what that phrase means. First-ever land attack capability. Japan could not strike targets on enemy territory before this. Not legally, not doctrinally, not practically. Now it can. And it will have the missiles in hand by the time you finish watching this video. But the Tomahawks are only the most visible part of the transformation. Japan's upgraded Type 12 missile has a reported range of 900 to 1,000 kilometers, meaning a launcher dispersed on Kyushu or the Ryukyu Island chain can threaten surface action groups operating across much of the East China Sea, complicating any attempt to mass forces for coercive patrols, blockades, or amphibious cover operations. Read that again slowly. A mobile missile launcher hidden somewhere on a small island or in a mountain valley on Kyushu can now reach Chinese naval vessels operating in the East China Sea. The Chinese Navy, which has spent the last decade projecting growing confidence and power in these waters, now has to think about every ship it sends through the first island chain as a potential target from an adversary it could not have threatened 2 years ago. And that is precisely the point. Japanese strategists increasingly describe the emerging doctrine as active deterrence, a strategy that will reshape the strategic balance across the Indo-Pacific. This is not purely defensive language anymore. Active deterrence means Japan is telling potential adversaries that the cost of aggression will be imposed immediately, at range, before any conflict even reaches Japanese soil. It is a profound psychological and operational shift. For decades, Japan's entire security posture was built around waiting to be attacked and then defending. The new posture says, "We will strike your forces before they reach us." China's military planners understand exactly what that means, and they are deeply unsettled by it. Now let's talk about the specific geography here, because the geography is the real story. Japan has been fortifying its southwestern region, encompassing the Ryukyu Islands, including Okinawa Prefecture, and outlying islands like Yonaguni, Ishigaki, Miyako, and Magashima, into what can only be described as a southwestern wall of bases, radars, and missile systems. This wall is not random. It follows the exact contour of the first island chain, the strategic barrier that separates China's coastal waters from the open Pacific Ocean. Every single choke point through which Chinese submarines, warships, and aircraft must pass to reach the wider Pacific is now either watched, contested, or directly threatened by Japanese assets. The frequency of Chinese warships passing off the southwestern coast of Japan has tripled over the last 3 years, and every week for the past 3 years, Chinese ships and planes passing through the first island chain have encountered Japanese forces stationed in this area. This is a weekly confrontation happening right now, every single week, that almost nobody in the American public knows about. While you are reading news about domestic politics and economic debates, Japan and China are actively, literally, facing each other down in these narrow straits, week after week, measuring each other's resolve. And then there is Yonaguni Island. This is a place most Americans have never heard of, but it may be one of the most strategically important pieces of land on Earth right now. Tokyo has confirmed plans to deploy medium-range surface-to-air missiles on Yonaguni as part of a wider ring of air and missile defenses across the Nansei Island chain. Upgraded Type 03 Chusam systems capable of engaging aircraft and some ballistic threats out to roughly 48 kilometers, giving Japan a denser shield over the narrow waters between Yonaguni and Taiwan. Yonaguni is just 70 miles from Taiwan. 70 miles. That is not a buffer zone. That is a front line. And Japan is now placing military hardware on it and building the infrastructure to sustain a garrison there indefinitely. Alongside the missile batteries, Japan is preparing to station an electronic warfare air defense unit on Yonaguni, because in early 2026, China tightened export controls on several dual-use materials essential to advanced defense manufacturing. That is China's economic counterpunch. Beijing understands it cannot stop what Japan is building militarily, not yet, so it is trying to slow it down by choking off the supply chain for the materials that go into missile systems and advanced weapons. This is the kind of sophisticated, multi-domain competition that the mainstream media almost never covers, because it does not fit the simple narrative of tanks rolling across borders. But there is something else happening here that deserves serious reflection. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force has nearly completed the carrierization of its 2 Izumo-class helicopter destroyers, which now possess the capability to deploy and operate F-35B fighter jets, meaning Japan will have its first light aircraft carriers since World War II, significantly enhancing its maritime operational radius and strike capabilities. First aircraft carriers since World War II. Let that land. The country that was defeated in 1945, partially because its carrier fleet was destroyed at Midway, is now rebuilding carrier aviation capabilities. China's military historians, and there are many of them who study Japan's World War II naval doctrine with obsessive attention, understand exactly what this signals. Japan is reacquiring the ability to project power far from its home islands. That is qualitatively different from pure territorial defense. In August 2025, the Japan Air Self-Defense Force deployed F-35B stealth fighter jets to the Nyutabaru Air Base in Miyazaki Prefecture for the first time, marking the first time since World War II that Japan has possessed carrier-based fighter jets, which are expected to be deployed aboard the Kaga and Izumo, the 2 Maritime Self-Defense Force destroyers currently being converted into aircraft carriers. These are not symbolic gestures, these are operational decisions with immediate tactical consequences. An F-35B operating from a carrier in the East China Sea is a stealth aircraft capable of penetrating Chinese air defenses, conducting reconnaissance, delivering precision munitions, and returning to a mobile platform that is much harder to target than a fixed airbase on the Japanese mainland. This is exactly the kind of capability that China's military planners have been hoping Japan would never develop. And Beijing is not staying quiet about any of this. Chinese military affairs expert Chen Hu said that Japan is adept at masking fundamental changes through incremental and ambiguous approaches, and that the PLA daily warned that if Japan militarily intervenes in the Taiwan Strait situation, both its people and the nation itself will face catastrophic consequences. That is a remarkable statement from a state-controlled publication. China's military newspaper is directly threatening Japan with catastrophic consequences for actions Japan has not even officially committed to taking. The fact that Beijing felt the need to say this publicly tells you something important. It tells you that China's military leaders are genuinely alarmed. They are not calmly managing a predictable situation. They are rattled, and they are broadcasting that they are rattled through their public threats. A Chinese military expert said that turning Magashima into a military base can be seen as Japan's preparation for military involvement in the Taiwan question, and stated that the PLA has sufficient strength and means to eliminate these so-called unsinkable aircraft carriers. There is a very specific phrase in that threat: unsinkable aircraft carriers. That is the language Japan's own strategists used in the 1930s and 1940s to describe island strongpoints. The fact that China's military experts are now using that same phrase back at Japan as a threat tells you they are studying the same strategic history and they see the same pattern emerging. Japan is recreating a networked island-based power projection structure. China sees it, and China is telling Japan it will destroy those islands if war comes. Now, here is where it gets really important for an American audience, because this is not just a Japan-China bilateral issue. The United States is woven into every layer of this. The upgrading of U.S. Forces Japan to a joint force headquarters has commenced in step with the establishment of the JSDF Joint Operations Command, a move that signals deeper integration of American and Japanese forces into a unified warfighting structure. This is significant. Historically, American and Japanese forces in the region operated under parallel but separate command structures. Integrating them into a joint headquarters is not a bureaucratic tweak. It means that in a crisis, American and Japanese forces would operate as a single combined force from the beginning, not after days or weeks of coordination. The response time to any Chinese provocation compresses dramatically. The decision-making becomes unified. And the signal to Beijing is unambiguous. An attack on Japan is now functionally an attack on American military personnel and infrastructure, even more so than before. The United States sent nuclear-capable B-52 strategic bombers, accompanied by Japanese F-35 and F-15 fighter jets, over the Sea of Japan in a direct military show of force amid a bitter Japan-China feud, the two allies' first such demonstration since the feud erupted. Nuclear-capable bombers flying alongside Japanese fighters over Japanese waters directly in the face of Chinese naval activity. This is the kind of signal that gets studied intensely in military colleges in Beijing. It means if you push Japan, you are pushing the United States, and if you push the United States, the conversation escalates to a place where nobody comes out ahead. Japan's defense minister has described the Yonaguni deployments as strictly defensive, saying they are intended to reduce the possibility of an armed attack on Japan. But China has reacted angrily, with its foreign and defense ministries denouncing the plan as a deliberate provocation and warning Japan will pay a painful price if it steps out of line over Taiwan. Pay a painful price. This is official Chinese government language, and this is the language being used in a period that is not yet a war, not yet even a direct confrontation. It is the language of a great power that feels its strategic position being slowly surrounded, and is trying to use verbal intimidation to stop what it cannot stop through other means. Japan is also moving into next-generation directed energy weapons. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force began live sea trials of a new 100-kilowatt class laser weapon system mounted on its test ship JS Asuka, designed to track and engage drones, small boats, and potentially incoming rockets or missiles. This matters because China's current military planning for a Taiwan scenario relies heavily on saturation attacks, waves of missiles, drones, and projectiles designed to overwhelm any single-point defense system. A laser weapon changes the math. It fires at the speed of light. It costs almost nothing per shot compared to a missile interceptor, and it can engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Japan is not just building a bigger version of its old defense structure. It is investing in entirely new categories of weapon that could neutralize some of China's most important strategic advantages. What you are watching unfold in the Western Pacific is one of the most consequential geopolitical transformations of the 21st century, and it is happening quietly, incrementally, and largely outside the attention of the American public. Japan has made a fundamental decision, the kind of decision that does not get reversed once it is made. It has decided that the post-war era of pacifism and passive defense is over. that the world has changed, that China has changed, and that Japan cannot afford to wait for its allies to defend it if the moment of crisis comes without warning. Japanese experts have noted that the America First approach in Washington undermines confidence in the US nuclear umbrella and Washington's willingness to come to the aid of its allies, meaning Japan must prepare to operate under new conditions by building up its own ammunition stockpiles, strengthening its defense industrial base, and improving logistics. That sentence is the honest heart of this entire transformation. Japan is not certain America will show up, and so Japan is making sure that even if America hesitates, Japan itself can impose a cost on any aggressor that makes the aggressor think twice. This is Japan buying insurance on its own survival, using the only currency that matters in this region, military capability. And the premium they are paying is enormous, measured in trillions of yen and in the quiet death of the pacifist constitutional era that defined Japanese identity for 80 years. The question this leaves the world with, and it is a question that has no comfortable answer, is whether the buildup that is meant to prevent war might instead be one of the accelerants that makes war more likely. Chinese naval activity has increased near Iwo Jima and the Nansei Islands, underscoring the strategic importance of these waters in the Western Pacific as Beijing responds to Japan's expanding capabilities. When one side builds a wall of missiles, the other side sends more ships to probe it. When one side deploys electronic warfare units, the other side increases its reconnaissance flights. The cycle of escalation has its own momentum, and history tells us that cycles like this do not always end with both sides deciding to step back from the edge. Sometimes they end with someone making a miscalculation, sometimes they end with a spark in a narrow strait, a ramming incident, a radar lock, a shot fired by a junior officer who did not get the order to stand down in time, and sometimes those sparks are the beginning of something that rewrites the map of the world. What is happening between Japan and China right now is not background noise. It is the central structural tension of our time. It involves the world's second and third largest economies, the most important maritime choke points on Earth, the question of Taiwan's future, the credibility of American alliances, and the legitimacy of the entire post-World War II international order. Japan has made its choice, China is responding, and the rest of us, whether we are paying attention or not, are going to live with the consequences.